What if winning was never about talent, circumstance, or luck, but about something happening quietly, invisibly, and entirely within the walls of your own mind, long before any result ever showed up in the world? There is something that separates the person who keeps almost making it, from the person who makes it every single time. And it is not what most people think. It is not more information. The almost person and the winning person often have access to the same books, the same opportunities, the same general circumstances of life. It is not more talent. History is overflowing with extraordinarily talented people who never produced anything close to what their gifts should have made possible. It is not even more effort, because some of the hardest working people in any room still find a way to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, repeatedly and almost predictably, as if something inside them is more committed to the familiar comfort of falling short than to the terrifying exposure of actually winning. The difference is the mind. Specifically, the trained mind. The mind that has been deliberately, systematically, philosophically conditioned to expect victory not as arrogance, not as delusion, but as the natural and inevitable outcome of a person who understands how their own thinking shapes every result they will ever produce. Today we are going to talk about how you build that mind. 7 principles. Real, deep, philosophically grounded, life-altering principles. Not motivational decoration. Not empty affirmations you repeat in the mirror and forget by Tuesday. The actual architecture of a mind trained to win. Let us begin. Principle 1, your expectations are a blueprint, not a wish. Most people treat expectation like a wish. They hope for good outcomes. They desire victory. They visualize the life they want with genuine feeling and genuine longing, and then they walk back into their daily reality operating on a completely different set of assumptions. Assumptions that expect difficulty. That anticipate rejection. That brace for failure with the practiced resignation of someone who has been here before and knows how the story ends. And the brutal, fascinating, scientifically documented truth is this. Your brain is always building toward what it expects, not what it wants. This is not metaphysics. This is neuroscience. The brain's reticular activating system, the RAS, is a network of neurons in the brainstem that acts as a filter for the approximately 11 million bits of information your senses collect every single second. Of those 11 million bits, your conscious mind processes roughly 40. The RAS decides which 40. And it makes that decision based on one primary criterion: what you have told it matters. What you have trained it, through repeated thought, repeated attention, repeated emotional investment, to look for. Tell your brain to expect failure, and it will find failure-confirming evidence in every room. Tell it to expect victory, genuinely, repeatedly, from a place of trained belief rather than wishful thinking, and it begins to surface opportunities, connections, patterns, and possibilities that were always there but completely invisible to the untrained eye. Your expectation is not a passive emotional state. It is an active instruction to the most sophisticated pattern recognition system in the known universe. There was a businessman named Raymond who had failed at 3 consecutive ventures. Each failure was different in its specifics. But Raymond noticed something that disturbed him deeply when he finally looked honestly at his own behavior across all 3. In each venture, there was a precise moment, always before the critical threshold, always just before the thing that would have made the difference, where Raymond had quietly, almost unconsciously, begun to prepare for the exit rather than press for the breakthrough. He had dressed it up as realism. Called it prudence. Told himself he was being responsible. But what he was actually doing was following his expectation. And his expectation, shaped by 3 previous failures and never consciously examined or retrained, was that this was the part where it fell apart. So it fell apart. Raymond spent 6 months doing something that felt almost embarrassingly simple. He went back through every failure and examined, not the external circumstances, but his internal state at the moment things began to unravel. And what he found, every time, was the same thing. The collapse on the outside had always been preceded by a quiet collapse of expectation on the inside. He retrained the expectation. Deliberately. Painfully. with enormous resistance from every neural pathway that had been built by 3 previous losses. His 4th venture succeeded. Not because the external circumstances were dramatically different. Because the blueprint was. Examine your expectations. Not the ones you express publicly, the ones that live in the quiet assumptions you make about how things will probably go. Those are your actual blueprint. And your life is being built to their specifications whether you acknowledge them or not. Principle 2, the story you tell yourself is the life you will live. Every human being is a storyteller. Not in the creative sense, though many are that too. But in the most fundamental cognitive sense. Your brain does not experience raw reality. It experiences reality filtered through narrative, the ongoing story it constructs about who you are, what the world is like, what you are capable of, and what you deserve. This story is not objective. It is not neutral. It is not simply a report of what has happened. It is an interpretation. And interpretations can be changed. Marcus Aurelius, a man who governed the most powerful empire in the world while managing military campaigns, plagues, personal betrayals, and the deaths of multiple children, wrote in his private journals words that every human being alive needs to hear. The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. He was not speaking abstractly. He was documenting a daily practice. A deliberate, disciplined, unrelenting practice of examining the stories he was telling himself about the events of his life, and choosing, consciously and with philosophical precision, which stories served his capacity to function with wisdom and virtue and which stories needed to be released. The person who trains their mind to expect victory is not the person who tells only positive stories. Toxic positivity is its own form of delusion and it collapses under the first serious pressure. The person who trains their mind to expect victory is the person who has learned to tell accurate stories, stories that include difficulty without being defined by it. Stories that include failure without concluding from it that failure is inevitable. Stories that locate agency, always, relentlessly, without exception, within the person doing the living rather than in the circumstances surrounding them. A young woman named Anika had spent her 20s telling herself a story she had inherited rather than chosen. The story went like this: people from where we come from don't end up in certain places. That world is for other kinds of people. You can want it, but wanting won't make you belong there. She had never said this story out loud. She would have denied holding it if asked directly. But it lived in every decision she didn't make, every application she didn't submit, every room she left before she had finished contributing what she actually had to offer. At 29, a mentor asked her to write down, honestly, without editing, what she believed would happen if she went after the thing she actually wanted most. What she wrote terrified her. Because it was not the words of someone who expected to win. It was the words of someone who had decided, at some point before she could consciously remember, that winning was not her category. Anika spent the next year rewriting the story. Not with affirmations. With evidence. She looked for, and found, every data point that challenged the inherited narrative. Every moment she had succeeded where the story said she shouldn't. Every room she had entered and belonged in despite the voice that said otherwise. She rewrote the story with facts that the original author, whoever had first whispered that narrative into the architecture of her self-concept, had deliberately left out. And then she went after the thing. And she got it. Your story is not fixed. It was written by experience, by other people's words, by the accumulated weight of moments that were interpreted, often by a younger, less equipped version of you, in conditions that no longer exist. You are the author now. Write accordingly. Principle 3, pressure is the price of admission, not the evidence of unsuitability. Here is a belief that is silently destroying more potential than almost anything else I can name. The belief that if something is right for you, if you are truly meant for it, truly capable of it, truly suited to it, it will feel natural. It will flow. The resistance will be minimal and the path will be clear. This belief is a lie. And it is a lie that has cost an incalculable amount of human potential. Nothing worth building feels natural at the beginning. Nothing worth becoming arrives without pressure. The resistance you feel, the difficulty, the doubt, the days when nothing is working and the gap between where you are and where you are trying to go feels not just large but laughable. That resistance is not evidence that you are in the wrong place. It is evidence that you are at the edge of your current capacity. And the edge of your current capacity is the only place growth has ever occurred for any human being who has ever lived. Epictetus, who knew more about operating under impossible pressure than most of us will ever be asked to understand, taught that difficulty was not an obstacle to the development of a strong character. It was the instrument of it. He wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." This is not resignation. Do not mistake it for resignation. It is the radical, empowering recognition that pressure is not a signal to stop. It is the price of admission to the version of yourself that exists on the other side of it. A runner named Kofi had a coach who told him something in his first year of serious training that he carried for the rest of his athletic career. The moment you want to stop is not the end of what you can do. It is the beginning of what you did not know you could do. Because the body, and the mind, quit long before they actually reach their limit. They quit at the edge of the familiar. At the boundary of the comfortable. At the point where continuing requires not just physical or mental effort but a deeper commitment, a commitment to becoming something you have not yet been. Kofi learned to recognize that moment, the moment of wanting to stop, not as a warning but as a landmark. A landmark that told him he had arrived at exactly the place where the real training began. Train your mind to read pressure as information rather than instruction. Pressure is not telling you to stop. Pressure is telling you that you have arrived somewhere that matters. Keep going. Principle 4, discipline your inner voice before it disciplines you. You are in a constant conversation. Not with other people. With yourself. And this conversation, this relentless, unfiltered, often unconscious running commentary that accompanies every waking moment of your life, is either your greatest ally or your most effective saboteur. There is no neutral inner voice. Every thought that passes through your mind is either building something or dismantling it. Either reinforcing the expectation of victory or eroding it. Either adding a brick to the architecture of a winning mind or quietly, almost imperceptibly, removing one. The untrained inner voice operates on autopilot. It defaults to whatever neural pathways have been most frequently traveled, which, for most people, means it defaults to criticism, comparison, catastrophizing, and the rehearsal of past failures as evidence for future ones. The trained inner voice is something entirely different. It is not the voice of someone who has never doubted. It is the voice of someone who has decided, deliberately and with the full understanding of what it costs, that doubt will not be the last word spoken in their internal conversation. A woman named Serena, not the tennis player, though the parallel is interesting, was a surgeon. And surgeons, by the nature of their work, operate in conditions where the inner voice is either a precision instrument or a liability. Early in her career, Serena's inner voice was the liability. In high-pressure moments, it produced a cascade of worst-case scenarios. What if this goes wrong? What if I miss something? What if I am not as good as they think I am? That fragmented her focus at exactly the moments when absolute concentration was required. Her senior colleague, a woman who had been operating for 30 years with a steadiness that Serena found almost inhuman, told her something that redirected the rest of her career. The voice doesn't go away. You just stop letting it drive. She taught Serena a practice. Not the suppression of the doubtful thoughts. Suppression never works, it sends the thought underground where it grows in the dark. But the practice of acknowledging and redirecting. Of hearing the doubt, naming it without judgment, and then deliberately, specifically, turning the inner conversation toward what was actually needed in the present moment. I hear you. And right now we are focused on this. The inner voice is not your enemy. It is an untrained instrument. And like every instrument, it can be trained. Practice catching the automatic thought. Name it. And then choose, consciously, every time, what comes next. Over time, that choice becomes reflex. There is a version of you that already knows how to win. Not the version that is waiting for better circumstances. Not the version that will emerge after the next achievement, the next validation, the next external proof that you are finally ready. The version that exists right now, underneath the conditioning, the inherited doubt, the accumulated weight of every time you almost made it but didn't, that version already carries everything required. What part 1 began to do was clear the ground. What part 2 is going to do is build the structure. 3 more principles. The ones that complete the architecture. The ones that take a mind that has begun to understand how expectation works, how stories function, how pressure is information and the inner voice is trainable, and forge all of that understanding into something permanent. Something that does not collapse under difficulty. Something that does not require ideal conditions to function. A mind that wins. In any weather. On any terrain. Against any odds. Let us finish what we started. Principle 5, identity is the foundation everything else is built on. Here is a question that most people never ask themselves with genuine seriousness. Not, what do I want to achieve? But, who do I believe I am? Because here is the truth that psychology, philosophy, and the lived experience of every person who has ever tried to change their results without changing their self-concept will eventually confirm. You will never consistently outperform your identity. Your identity is not your goals. It is not your vision board. It is not the aspirational version of yourself you describe in job interviews or present on your best days. Your identity is the deep, largely unconscious, constantly operating set of beliefs you hold about what kind of person you fundamentally are. And your behavior, every decision, every response to pressure, every moment of discipline or collapse, flows from that identity with the inevitability of water finding its level. A person who identifies as someone who finishes what they start, finishes. Not always perfectly. Not always on the first attempt. But finishing is so consistent with their self-concept that quitting creates a cognitive dissonance that is more uncomfortable than the difficulty of continuing. A person who identifies as someone things never quite work out for, will find, with uncanny consistency, that things never quite work out. Not because the universe is conspiring against them. Because their identity is making decisions their conscious mind doesn't even know are being made. James, a man I want you to hear about, had spent 15 years trying to build financial stability through a series of strategies, habits, and disciplines that he picked up from books and seminars and the advice of people more successful than him. None of it stuck. Not because the strategies were wrong. Many of them were excellent. But because James was trying to install successful behaviors into an identity that fundamentally believed, at a level far deeper than the strategies could reach, that he was not the kind of person financial stability belonged to. The strategies kept sliding off. Like paint on a wall that hasn't been properly primed. The day James stopped asking what should I do and started asking who do I need to become, everything changed. Not immediately. Identity work is slow and unglamorous and requires a patience that our results-obsessed culture rarely honors. But it changed. Because he stopped trying to act his way to a new identity. He started building a new identity that his actions would naturally flow from. The Stoics understood this at the deepest level. Epictetus taught that the first and most important work any human being can undertake is the work of understanding their own prohairesis, their capacity for rational choice, their will, their fundamental character. Because everything else, every external achievement, every result, every experience of the world, flows from the quality of that inner foundation. Ask yourself, honestly, beneath the goals and the aspirations and the public narrative, who do you believe you are? And then ask the harder question. Is that person someone who wins? If the answer is no, or even maybe not, then no principle, no strategy, no amount of effort applied to the surface of your life will produce lasting results. Because the foundation is not built for them. Build the foundation first. Decide, deliberately, repeatedly, with the patience of someone who understands that identity is not changed in a single declaration but in thousands of small, consistent, identity-confirming choices, who you are. And then let everything else follow. Principle 6, master the recovery, not just the performance. Everyone talks about performing. Nobody talks about recovering. And this is one of the most expensive gaps in how most people think about training their mind to win, because the ability to recover from a setback is not a secondary skill. It is not the consolation prize for people who couldn't avoid failure. It is one of the primary disciplines of a winning mind. Perhaps the most important one. Because here is what winning actually looks like in real life, not in the highlight reel, not in the retrospective where every difficulty gets reframed as essential preparation, but in the actual lived experience of people who produce extraordinary results over long periods of time. It looks like failing. Recovering. Failing again. Recovering faster. Failing again. Recovering with less drama each time. Until the recovery becomes so practiced, so automatic, so deeply wired into the identity of the person doing it, that failure loses its power to define the narrative. The distance between a person who wins and a person who almost wins is rarely the number of times they failed. It is the speed and quality of their recovery. A painter named Eloise had a professor in her final year of art school who told her something that she initially found deeply unsatisfying and later recognized as the most useful thing anyone ever said to her about her craft. He looked at a piece she had spent 3 weeks on, a piece she was proud of, a piece she thought was among the best work she had ever done, and he said, "It doesn't work. Start again." And then he walked away. Eloise's first response was grief. Her second was anger. Her third, and this is the response that determined everything, was curiosity. She started again. Not because the grief and anger weren't real, but because she had been trained, by this professor, by years of a discipline that demanded it, to move through those emotions without making a home in them. To feel the full weight of the setback and then redirect that weight into the next attempt. She started again. And the next piece was better. Significantly better. In ways she could not have produced without the failure of the previous one. The professor knew this. That was why he said what he said. He was not being cruel. He was training her recovery. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in the middle of governing an empire that was besieged on multiple fronts simultaneously, words that reveal a mind that had mastered the recovery above almost all else. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is not a motivational slogan. This is a description of a practiced mental discipline. The discipline of taking whatever has gone wrong, the failure, the setback, the result that did not match the effort, and converting it, through the alchemy of a trained mind, into information. Into direction. Into the next move. The winning mind does not avoid failure. It metabolizes it. Faster each time. More completely each time. Until the metabolism of setback becomes as natural and as automatic as breathing. Practice your recovery. When things go wrong, and they will, give yourself full permission to feel it. The disappointment is real. The frustration is legitimate. The grief of a genuine setback deserves to be honored. And then, before the feeling becomes a permanent residence rather than a temporary weather system, ask the question that separates the recovering mind from the stuck one. What does this make possible that wasn't possible before? Every failure answers that question. If you are willing to ask it. Principle 7, play infinity, not episodes. We have arrived at the final principle. And it is the one that holds everything else together. The one without which all the others eventually collapse under the weight of impatience. Play infinity. Not episodes. Most people experience their lives as a series of episodes. Discrete, bounded, begin and end events. This job. This relationship. This venture. This attempt. And because the experience is episodic, the measure of success is also episodic. Did this particular episode produce the desired result? Yes or no? Win or lose? Success or failure? This episodic framing is one of the most limiting mental structures a human being can operate inside of. Because it makes every setback a potential final word. Every failed attempt a possible conclusion. Every period of slow or invisible progress a reason to question whether the whole endeavor is worth continuing. The person with a trained winning mind does not play episodes. They play infinity. They understand, at the level of genuine, practiced, philosophically rooted conviction, that they are not in a single game with a single outcome. They are in a lifelong process of becoming. And in a lifelong process of becoming, no single episode has the authority to determine the final result. A single failed crop does not mean the farmer was wrong to plant. A single lost case does not mean the lawyer has no business in a courtroom. A single rejected manuscript does not mean the writer has nothing worth saying. These are episodes. And episodes, even painful ones, even humiliating ones, even the ones that cost years of effort and genuine sacrifice, are just chapters. They are not the book. Seneca wrote, with the urgency of a man who understood that time was the only resource that could never be recovered. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. He was talking about the waste of distraction, of aimlessness, of living without philosophical intentionality. But his words land equally hard on this point. When you play episodes, when you allow a single result, a single season, a single chapter of difficulty to become the basis for your assessment of your entire capacity and your entire future, you waste the time that the larger game requires. You quit in chapter 3 of a book that needed 20. You abandon a compound investment in year 2 of a 30-year horizon. You walk away from a version of yourself that was 6 months from becoming someone unrecognizable, because 6 months looked, in that moment, like forever. There was a composer named Heinrich who spent 11 years working on a single symphony. Not because he was slow. Not because he lacked talent. But because the piece he was trying to create existed at the very edge of what he was currently capable of, and closing the gap between his vision and his execution required a patience that the people around him genuinely could not comprehend. They told him to move on. To work on something achievable. To stop pouring years into something that might never be finished, might never be performed, might never be recognized. Heinrich played infinity. He understood, with the clarity of someone who had made an irrevocable internal commitment, that he was not building a resume of completed projects. He was building a body of work that would speak for itself when it was ready. And it would be ready when it was ready. Not when the people watching his timeline grew impatient. The symphony was finished. It was performed. It outlasted everyone who told him to stop. Train your mind to think in decades rather than quarters. In legacies rather than launches. In the accumulated, compounding, unstoppable power of a person who has decided, once, completely, and without the need for constant reaffirmation, that they are in this for the full distance. Not the sprint. The marathon. Not the episode. The infinite game. And in the infinite game, the person who wins is never the person with the most talent, or the best timing, or the most favorable circumstances. It is always, without exception, the person who refused to stop. The full architecture, all 7 principles. Let me bring all 7 principles together now. Not as a list to be memorized, but as a portrait to be inhabited. The person with a mind trained to win carries expectations that function as blueprints, active, precise instructions to their brain about what to find, what to build toward, what to make possible. They tell themselves stories that are accurate rather than inherited, stories that locate agency within themselves and refuse to allow past difficulty to write the ending of a story that is still being lived. They have made peace with pressure, not comfortable peace, not the false peace of someone who has stopped feeling the difficulty, but the grounded, philosophically rooted recognition that pressure is the price of admission to every version of themselves worth becoming. They have disciplined their inner voice, not silenced it, not suppressed it, but trained it to move through doubt without being governed by it. They have built their identity from the inside out, not from achievements backward, but from a deliberate, daily, patient construction of self-concept that their behaviors naturally flow from. They have mastered recovery, not the avoidance of failure, but the rapid, complete, increasingly automatic conversion of setback into information and information into direction. And they play infinity. Always. In every domain. With the patient, unshakable, completely committed certainty of someone who understands that they are not in an episode. They are in a life. And a life, fully lived, philosophically grounded, trained and intentional and courageously committed, is always enough time to become exactly who you were capable of being. I want to leave you with something to carry. Not a task. Not a to-do list. Not another thing to add to the already overwhelming architecture of self-improvement that most people have constructed and then collapsed under. Just a question. One honest, quiet, sit with it in the stillness question. What would be different, in your decisions, your standards, your daily choices, your response to difficulty, if you genuinely, completely, at the deepest level of your self-concept, expected to win? Not hoped. Not wished. Not cautiously optimized for. Expected. Sit with that question. Let it move through you. Let it land in the places where the doubt has been living rent-free for longer than you can remember. Let it ask those places, gently but firmly, whether it is time for new tenants. Because the mind trained to win is not a mind that has been handed different circumstances. It is a mind that has been given, through practice, through philosophy, through the slow and unglamorous and absolutely transformative work of training, a different relationship with the circumstances it already has. That mind is available to you. It has always been available to you. The training begins the moment you decide it does. And the decision, the real one, the one that holds, is always made in a moment exactly like this one. Quiet. Clear. And still. This is the Stoic path. And the Stoic path exists for one reason, to have the conversations that go beneath the surface. The conversations that don't just inspire you for 48 hours and then fade. The conversations that give you a framework, philosophically grounded, practically applicable, genuinely life-altering, for thinking about who you are and who you are becoming. Every week. Without compromise. Without flinching. If that is what you are here for, subscribe right now. Hit that button. Turn on your notifications. Because what we did today is one conversation in an ongoing library of conversations designed to build the kind of mind that changes everything it touches. Share this with someone who needs it. Someone who is talented and capable and somehow still falling short, not because they lack ability but because nobody has ever shown them how to train the mind underneath the ability. Send it to them. They will thank you for it. This is the Stoic path. And you, trained, grounded, expectant, and playing the infinite game, are just getting started.